What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to kind of be kicking it old school with some good old education on nutrition topics. This is just something that whenever I talk about it, either in a full day of eating, a vlog, Instagram, just kind of like briefly mentioning bulking or like the end of my cut that I just finished, I feel like so many people ask me like either what I did, what I changed, or if they're trying to figure out what they should do, whether it's bulking or cutting. I just always get asked that, like, how do I know when it's time to bulk? How do I know if I'm ready for a cut? It's just been a while since I've had like a good old-fashioned sit-down direct topic nutritionally related video. So I want to do that for you guys today. I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get on into the topic. The very first thing that I always tell people, regardless of if you are trying to bulk, if you're trying to cut, maybe you're even just trying to maintain, the first piece of information that I think is very important for everybody to have at baseline is your total daily energy expenditure. Just as a little recap, your TDEE makes up your basal metabolic rate, your energy expenditure from working out, your non-exercise activity, all of the things basically that you are doing in a day, whether it's sitting, sleeping, working out, walking, whatever, what your body is personally burning. A lot of factors that play into this, and it's why I don't like when people compare themselves to other people on social media, because number one, you might not have the same lifestyle as them, you might not have the same training age as them, like how much muscle mass you have, what your personal training looks like in comparison to theirs. Like, there's just so many things that make up your individual total daily energy expenditure that there is no reason for you to be comparing it to other people's or to try to copy someone else's. So this is why I say for you individually, the first step is always figuring out your total daily energy expenditure. Now, there are calculators online that you can get kind of like a rough estimation, but I always tell people to take those with a grain of salt because of course it's not 100% accurate. The way that I personally like to figure out someone's total daily energy expenditure is to have them track everything that they're currently eating for like a span of 2 to 3 weeks. Now, the problem that I think sometimes happens with this is people who are not tracking everything accurately. So where you can kind of run into trouble with this is if you're not really proficient with tracking, or let's say, you're eating out a lot, you're not really weighing things with grams, you're kind of just guessing and estimating. This is a recipe for disaster, and I would not recommend doing it. The only way that I would suggest really making sure that you are getting as close as possible to figuring out your total daily energy expenditure is to know what you're eating as accurately as possible. And why this is important is because you want to see how your weight responds to this intake. So for example, if I'm going to be tracking my weight and my food for the span of 2 to 3 weeks, if I am seeing that I'm eating, let's say, 2,200 calories consistently, and my weight is staying within 1 to 2 pounds, that's going to let me know that I'm eating roughly around 2,200 calories. Secondly, if you are someone who has like a big variety in their intake, this isn't probably going to apply to you because this is going to kind of take a little bit more time to figure out what your average is. But for the most part, I feel like people tend to eat around the same amount on a daily basis, even if they're not tracking. So it's important to know what that looks like for you and how your weight is responding to it. This is also eye-opening for people because sometimes when they start tracking, they realize like, oh my gosh, I'm eating a lot more than I thought I was. And let's say that, they're eating 2,700 calories and they've been gaining weight. Well, this lets you know that you're obviously not burning 2,700 calories per day. Hopefully that makes sense, but you can start with a rough estimation via a calculator. There's like some free TDEE calculators out there. Of course, again, take it with a grain of salt, but use that to try to estimate what you are currently eating and how your weight is responding on a week-to-week basis. I always like to tell people to make sure that you take the averages. So you're weighing daily, and then you're taking your weekly average when it comes to whether it's logging it on your Fitbit or MyFitnessPal, whatever the case may be. So if you are keeping track of your calories and you are averaging roughly 2,000 calories per day and your weight is dropping, that tells you that you're burning more than 2,000 calories per day. So why this is important is because whether you are going to bulk, which is being in a caloric surplus, or cut, being in a deficit, is you need to have some sort of starting point. I think the biggest mistake that people make when they're either jumping into a cut or jumping into a bulk is that they do too much right off the bat, and it's really hard to maintain and it's hard to make long-term progress. So for me personally, I'm just going to be going over the last year's worth of data because I have gone through one successful bulk and one successful cut, and kind of where I started versus where I'm ending. The next most important piece of information is to understand that building muscle is not going to look like getting leaner while getting bigger at the same time. time, with the exception for people who are using performance enhancing drugs or on some sort of HRT. For the majority of people, gaining weight, especially when it comes to people who have not done it before, can be kind of scary, kind of overwhelming, because you're so used to seeing that number on the scale go down and associating that number on the scale with progress, like decreasing. But when we're talking about bulking, that's not the case. We want to kind of see a little bit of an increase. I know that can be scary, but the only way to get to where you want to be long term, especially if you're looking to get leaner in the future, you want to look more lean or more toned. You know, I hate that word, but you get the point. You have to have muscle mass, period. Like if you're starting from a point of very minimal muscle mass and you are trying to cut to look leaner, you're going to have a really difficult time because you don't have that solid foundation of muscle mass underneath. I just feel like I have gone through quite a few successful bulks, and I have kind of changed my physique from not having as much muscle mass and, you know, more like a CrossFit endurance style body, if you will, over to where I look now, which in my opinion is much more balanced. I feel like I have stronger legs, my upper body has grown, and I just kind of like balanced out my physique a little bit. And the only way that I was able to do this successfully was via bulking. In the summer of 2022, which is when I started my like initial desire to change my body composition and really focus on gaining muscle mass, I was anywhere between 123 to 125 pounds. And this was kind of like my maintenance. So referring back to what I was talking about in the beginning of this video, I was able to maintain and stay around 2100-ish calories. And for me, that maintenance and that body weight was 123 to 125. I knew that my goal was gonna have to be to get up to maybe somewhere close to 130, 128, 129, in order for me to cut back down to a higher point to then maintain on a higher amount of food. Because when you have more muscle mass, your body takes more calories to burn and just to maintain. So the first thing that I changed was obviously my eating. And again, this is just a disclaimer. This was my personal, you know, macros and numbers. So what works for me is not always going to work for everyone else. And I am 5'2", okay? So I'm a smaller person. So this is going to be a little bit different. But when I started, my protein was around 130. My carbs were like 250-ish, give or take. And my fat was anywhere from 50 to 55. I just personally prefer to eat a higher carb, lower fat diet. I've always been that way. It works better for my digestion. So that's just what I chose to do. Over the course of 6 to 8 months, I increased calories by roughly 200 to 250 every few weeks. And this is really important because I think another mistake that people make is increasing calories too quickly or not increasing calories at all, and then they're not seeing the results that they want. So you kind of have to find that sweet spot and what works for you. And for me personally, and what I like to do with a lot of my female clients for a safe range is anywhere from 100 to 300 calories. So what this looked like for me was like a 5-gram increase in protein, maybe a 10-gram increase in carbs, and then 2 to 3 grams of fat every, I would say 3 to 4-ish weeks, give or take, depending on how the adherence went of that week. That's the first change. Now, the second change that I think is really important, and again, what a lot of people don't want to do, is cutting back on cardio and endurance-based sports for the time being. Obviously, you guys know I come from a CrossFit background, so there was a time period where I was pretty much doing CrossFit like on a daily basis. It was really high energy output, it was intensity, there was some running days, there were a lot of longer endurance-based workouts. And while this is great for like overall calorie burning, you don't want to do this when you're starting a bulk, because you want to be able to use that cardio as a tool later on down the line when it comes to your cut. I initially cut back on my CrossFit days from like 5 days a week to maybe 2. If I was like really itching, I would do like a third really short one, but I cut it down pretty much in half, and I made sure that my steps started at 10,000, because obviously, like, again, this is just my lifestyle. I don't sit at a desk from 9 to 5, so like overall my steps are normally pretty high, but I didn't want to start out a bulk with like a high step count of 14,000, 15,000, because again, you want to be able to use that as a tool when you're going into your cut. So with that training change, I think the second most important thing that I did was focus a ton on bodybuilding hypertrophy style. Now, this is something that really took me a long time to get used to, because of course, again, coming from a CrossFit background, I like to be mentally, physically stimulated during a workout, moving around a lot, doing a bunch of different things. It's like ADHD for working out, okay? So bodybuilding is really, really hard. And something that I've learned is that in CrossFit, we did a lot of accessory work where it would be like 3 sets of 10 bicep curls. And I would see people, myself included, just like going through the motions, like doing it pretty quick, calling it a day and calling it your accessory. With bodybuilding, that is not the case. And it is why I wrote my bodybuilding program on my app with progressive overload, because the biggest mistake that I personally made, that so many people made, is not keeping track of your weight and not increasing in some capacity. What this might look like is, let's say you're doing, like you're starting out with 4 sets of 10 leg press. I'm just gonna use this as an example. And you are trying to do 10 to 12 reps for all 4 sets. You should not be able to do those 10 to 12 reps with so much ease that you're not needing to take some rest in between. This doesn't mean that you're maxing out and you're like going to failure, but it should be relatively challenging to the point where you feel like, I always say, like on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe like a 7. Be pretty challenging, and you need the recovery in between. And this is important because the next time that you do this exercise, let's say it's next week or 2 weeks after that, whatever weight that you did for those 10 to 12 reps, you're going to want to try to increase that by like 5 pounds if you can. And if you can't do it for all 4, maybe it's the last 2 sets. And then the next week you try to increase it for 3 sets. Or if you're able to do that weight and you want to challenge yourself in a different way, you can go at the higher end of the rep count. Let's say you only did them for 4 sets of 10. That next week, you're going to do 4 sets of 12 at that weight. So either way, you're increasing your volume, both from a weight standpoint or a rep standpoint. And this is so, so crucial to building muscle. We want to make sure that you're challenging your muscle groups that you're working, increasing the weight. Obviously, like I said, you're not going to a complete failure every single time, but when you're doing these workouts, you do want to make sure that you're keeping track of your weight so that you know how to improve on your progressive overload. And B, making sure that you're actually really challenging yourself and slowing down the movement. Because rushing through it and just getting it done to get it done is not going to yield the results that you want. I know this because I'm guilty of it, and CrossFit makes you do everything so fast, but bodybuilding, you want to do it slow. Now, I am not saying that I am like a bodybuilder competitor or like I'm proficient in all of the bodybuilding world, but I will say that ever since I started slowing down the reps, slowing down everything, my workouts, really like squeezing at the top of each thing, was when I personally started noticing the most improvement in like the muscle groups that maybe I was struggling to build, like biceps or triceps, things that I didn't really put a lot of effort in when I was doing mostly CrossFit. And then lastly, the third most important change, obviously, that I always tell people that they need to focus on when it comes to either bulking or cutting is your recovery. If you are not sleeping consistently, eating nutritious foods, drinking enough water, supplementing, which we're going to talk about in just a second, it is going to make it so much more difficult for you. So you obviously want to make things as easy as possible for yourself. So starting with the basics, sleep, water, food, recovery, that's what you need to prioritize. Okay. Like get that under control first before you decide to go into a bulk or a cut. Talking about supplementation, I think is really important because I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I do think that there are some things that you can implement into your personal routine that might make it, again, a little bit easier for you to do either bulking or cutting. And obviously, number one is going to be protein. So regardless of if you're bulking or cutting, keeping your protein high is a really great way to make sure you're seeing the body composition changes that you want. There's no right or wrong like amount in terms of protein, and there's not one size fits all for everybody, but the most important thing is making sure that you're getting at least 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. This is important. Lean body mass and not total body mass. The reason why people get confused with this is because if you are someone who weighs, 220 pounds and you're trying to get down to like 150 or 160, you have a significant amount of weight to lose. You're not going to want to be eating 220 grams of protein per day. That's crazy. And for the majority of people, especially smaller females, that's just not necessary, even when you're bulking or cutting. Making sure that you kind of have a rough estimation of your lean body mass is really really important because that's what you're gonna wanna use as your minimum. Just wanna make sure that you're not over consuming protein because you could definitely be getting more out of having a better balance of carbs and fats. So again, not one size fits all, but a good starting point would be roughly 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body mass. Now, where your carbs and fats fall is gonna heavily rely on what your overall energy expenditure is, because either you might not have a lot of room to work with or you do. And then secondly, what you personally prefer. Me, I like to eat more carbs and fats, like I said, so my carbs were on the higher side and my fats were on the lower side. If you are cutting, you're gonna have to be cutting into one of the two no matter what. So it kind of just depends on what you would rather give up in terms of calories. And again, as a little refresher, 1 gram of protein is 4 calories, 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories, and 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. So obviously you have more calories per gram of fat, which means it's kind of harder to manipulate that when you are cutting. You have your protein intake, your total daily energy expenditure, your sleep and recovery, your training changes, and obviously like the rate at which you are going to either bulk or cut. Like I said, I personally like to do it conservatively because I just feel better that way. And I know my clients sometimes can have a little bit of difficulty with seeing the scale go up in terms of a bulk. And also you don't want to cut too quickly and too much too quickly because it's going to be harder to maintain that. So with all that being said, I think the next question you need to ask yourself is, how do you know if you're ready for either a bulk or a cut? Or let's just say you're thinking of like, well, I don't know which one to do. I'm at like this maintenance phase. I'm at a crossroads. I could bulk, I could cut. First thing that I tell people they need to consider is their lifestyle. So a lot of times when it comes to, the holiday season, a lot of people have traveling, they have going out to eat, they have things that are going to make their lifestyle a little bit less rigid, I should say. And so in my experience, I always find it easier to bulk during those time periods because you can be a little bit more lax with your macros. It's not a huge deal. And it's, I personally think, more stressful to cut during the holiday season in times when you're going to have a lot of like inconsistencies or being out of your routine, traveling, so on and so forth. If you're going into this holiday season, let's say, and you're considering a bulk, I would say the first thing that you need to ask yourself is, are you mentally okay with seeing the scale go up instead of seeing the scale go down? Period. This is the first thing that you need to consider because your mental health is so important and you don't want to fall into that trap of doing something that's like not great for your mental health or, just like making it more difficult for yourself. And if you're not ready, if you haven't tackled some of those like mental issues with food, I think that's where you need to start because it's going to be really, really hard for you to actually get through the process. If you're mentally beating yourself up over it, you're going to be miserable. Number 2 is going to be, how much body fat in relation to muscle do you have and what's most important to you? Because when it comes to clients who have a significant amount of body fat to lose, I would suggest starting with a cut first before you're maintaining and going into a bulk. If you're someone who has maybe roughly equal, like you maybe don't have a ton of muscle mass, but you don't have a ton of fat either, I would personally recommend going into a bulk because you're going to want to build that muscle mass capacity up so that overall in the future, when you do decide to cut, you have a higher base to start with, like I was saying. And also it's just like, it's harder to cut when you don't have a lot of body fat to lose to start with, like deciding between the two. I would say the next most important thing to decide on and to just base your decision on would be, how much body fat do you personally have to lose? I love how I said that this was going to be like a short video, and here we are. I'm going to try to wrap it up. So the last thing that I think is really important for you guys to do, whether you're bulking or cutting, is to keep track of your progress with the same variables, regardless of if you're bulking or cutting. Now, for me personally, I like to keep track of my weight with my Fitbit app, and I try to weigh in daily, and then it takes the weekly averages so I can see like on a trend basis where I'm going. And then I also take progress pictures pretty much like once a week or every other week in the same way. So like I'll set my tripod up, I'll do a front facing picture, a side facing picture, and a back picture. And this is so important. Even if you don't post them anywhere, just keep them for yourself so that you can compare how you're making progress, let's say from week 1 to week 8. It's really hard to see these like really small minuscule changes, but when you're comparing them picture wise and you can put them side by side, it's so much easier to be able to see, and hopefully that will help you know like whether you should keep bulking or keep cutting, or just give you an idea of where you are. I think when it comes to knowing how long you should do it for bulking, honestly, the longer the better. The more time that you can spend growing muscle tissue, the better. The less time you can spend cutting, the better. So again, like kind of going back to the lifestyle and like what works for your schedule, it's going to depend on how long you have to cut or how long you have to bulk. And if you really can't and you just want to maintain, I have a lot of my clients that are just at maintenance and doing really well with it. I like to spend time in maintenance, especially when I know that I don't have a lot of time to place into tracking everything and being really like on point with my nutrition. I'll just kind of roughly aim for maintenance. But when it comes to bulking, if I'm going to set to do a designated bulk, I'm going 6 months minimum. Like, because you're not going to gain significant muscle mass in like 2 months. It's just not going to happen. And you have to know that you're going to have to do it again. So just to kind of give you an example as to like what my scheduling looks like for the year, going into this like fall season, so we're in the beginning of September, I'm going to start bulking probably within the next couple of weeks. So we have like, we'll just call it October, November, December, January, February, March is normally when I start to go back down to maintenance. And then I'll stay at maintenance between like March, April, maybe some of May. My cut always starts around the summertime. It's just the easiest for me. It's also super, super hot here, so I don't like have as much of an appetite as I do in the wintertime. So I will start to cut around like June, July, August. And for me personally, 12 weeks is my max for cutting. So that brings you right back into September, which is where we started. And then I repeat the cycle all over again. This is just what works for me. I've been doing it for the last 2 years and I've seen really, really great success with it. So I wanted to kind of break it down and just tell you guys, you know, what I've personally been doing. So I hope that that kind of like answers your bulking and cutting questions. As always, if you have any other, leave them down in the comment section below. But of course, I do still take clients for lifestyle and performance-based clients with Black Iron Nutrition. And then my training app is always in the description. You can do a free week trial so you can see if it works for you. But I have tons and tons and tons of workouts on there, tons of programs. You can do whichever you want. Like there's bodybuilding, CrossFit, functional, at home, dumbbell, body weight. Like there's so much on there that I've put so much work into. So I always recommend, if you don't know where to start in terms of programming, definitely start with some sort of program. Like I was saying earlier in the video, you want to make sure you're keeping track of it. You don't want to be going into the gym just doing like random things. So those are all the key points, whether you're bulking or cutting. Let me know if this video was helpful for you. I love you guys so much and I appreciate you as always. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and click subscribe, and I will see you in next week's video.